Hello, my name is Matt Hook. Today I'm joined by Tony Clark. You are currently listening to WRUW FM 91.1 Cleveland. You're listening to A Different Drum, where the more you love music, the more music you love. Tony Clark is also known as Renascence Music. Tony is an electronic ambient composer based in Austin, Texas. This is the second time I've interviewed him. The first time I interviewed him was to announce the release of his album, Music Uniquely Yours. This interview is to honor the sequel to that album, 2440 Millennials. Music Uniquely Yours featured a concept that I was a huge fan of. Tony talked to his fans about that, who he calls his tribe with a chill vibe, and asked them about what helps them to relax. He then used each individual story as the basis for a different track on the album. Now, this next album, 2440 Millennials, uses that same concept, but in a different, smaller scope. The album is dominated by two tracks, Resilient and Quiet Blue, that were inspired by Tony's friendship with young musician Juha Juppi. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tony.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right.
So that was an astounding rundown of the two albums. Thank you for that.
No problem. Hopefully I did them both justice.
Yes, I couldn't have done that any better. I might need to borrow you for that.
All right. Now to introduce the audience to your music, I wanted to play a track off 2440 Millennials. The song is called Zebra. All right, that song was Zebra by Renascence off the album 2440 Millennial. Renascence is currently joining me today via Skype from Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Matt. That's a fun little piece.
Especially, I like the little bits of electronic percussion in there. That's one thing that always sticks out to me about your music, is that even though you're ambient, your music still has a beat to it.
Yeah, that particular piece, the rhythm's driven by the instrumentation, by the that synthetic sound. The whole question of beats and rhythms and ambient music is kind of tossed around a lot as to how far away are you stepping from the genre when you start throwing beats into the music. But that's just my approach to it. I like rhythm. There are obvious pieces that I do that don't have rhythm, but yeah, that particular one is a fun one. It's got that bouncy vibe to it.
Yeah, so I know the end of that too also features that electronic voice repeating the name of the track. So what's the meaning of that word, zebra?
I believe it's a European version of zebra. The album was created from, I want to say wholly from a synthesizer engine created by a company called Juha. And this one is called Zebra, is the name of the entire piece of software. And, when I'm writing a piece of music, often a sound strikes me and I'll build off of that. And I thought it was really interesting that they had played around with a vocal line and kind of flagshipped their software around the word zebra. So essentially, they spurred the song and named it for me. And being European, my assumption is that is maybe how they say zebra. They say zebra.
Just a little bit of a different pronunciation.
So that's where it came. It's it's not a mythical or mystical story. It's just that was the actual name of that sound patch, and I built the whole piece around it.
That's cool. So I want to get back to your comments earlier about kind of percussion and rhythms in ambient music. Have you ever experienced any like pushback due to your use of percussion?
Pushback, maybe more of commentary of, well, you're not truly creating in the ambient genre because you're placing beats under it. There's certain forums that are very true to the genre, and if you post up a track with the rhythms in there, they'll push back and go, that's not really ambient. To many people, ambient is real spatial and spacey and long droning tones and things like that. Things that don't pull your attention away from maybe what you're doing. There's been moments in posting tracks here and there where someone has said, that's not ambient. So I kind of tag myself as chill, lounge, ambient, just kind of to encompass a lot of different vibes and feelings.
Now, the thing that inspired this whole album was your friendship with musician Juha Juppi. Can you tell me a little bit about that friendship?
Yeah, Juha is a singer-songwriter out of Canada, and we met, I'm going to say now maybe 2 years ago, completely virtually, and we basically became involved in a musicianship accountability system where we would set out our goals for the week, the month, and then we would check in with each other. And typically after a project, that kind of system breaks apart and you go your way, but we just continue to talk and motivate each other. And he had actually been one of the people who had signed on to the very first Music Uniquely Yours albums. And I had so many people become a part of that, I wasn't able to get everyone into the first album, so I decided I would put him in the second group. But it was a friendship based on our common musical goals of getting our music out there. And I really enjoy his music a lot. So that's how we met, completely online and virtual through a Facebook group, I believe. And we've just stayed in touch ever since then. And in the very beginning, we would have an accountability phone call every week just to keep ourselves on track. So that's how we met, and how he ended up being the focal point for the second album, which was originally going to be another multiple tracks from multiple people. But as I started working on his, I wanted to get his done first to make sure he got got into the album and was properly treated. And once I started his song, after coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it, it ended up being over 24 minutes long. So I decided maybe the album was pretty close to filled with music. So actually, the last two tracks, Resilient and Quiet Blue, is the entire piece written for Juha, which I ended up breaking apart to more for just technical reasons. So when moving files around to my mastering engineer, Liam, at In the Zone Studios, it was easier to transmit files around. So his song, which or a piece of music that would have been typically 3 to 5 to 6 minutes long, ended up much, much bigger. And so I essentially broke it down and separated it, added 2 other tracks, just to kind of fill out some time. And, again, I was playing with this new synthesizer engine, Zebra, and I really wanted to explore it as deeply as possible on 2440 Millennial.
That's interesting how both the albums focused on your relationship with one person, and then you mainly also focused on a single synth engine to create the album.
Yeah, that's true. Very, very, very interesting look at that. Yeah, because I'm 99.9% sure that all of 2440 Millennial is driven by the Zebra synth engine. All the sounds are in there. No, actually, there's one sound. There's one piece of an electric wish that comes from Native Instruments, now that I think about it. But it's just a long droning thing. But yeah, I would say 90% of the album is driven from one synth engine. So yeah, interesting observation. A 1-to-1 ratio.
So I was wondering, for that track 2440, how long did it take you to write that?
The 2 pieces, Resilient and Quiet Blue, yep. I would say that took several weeks, because every time I thought it was done, I would come back to the studio just to kind of, tuck it in and move it aside for the next project. And then something else would get added to it, and something else would get added to it. So it took several weeks, which is kind of atypical for me. I typically work on pieces, and sometimes they come out as in 2 or 3 days, in a very quick process. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Maybe just attention span deficit. I'm not sure. I don't want to get bored with it. But yeah, that 24 pieces or so, that was a long process. It kept growing. I could never figure out how to end it.
So what was it about that piece that just made it so you just couldn't stop it and leave it alone?
I think a lot of it was I was exploring the new synthesizer engine. And as I was working on, maybe the conclusion of, a 3-minute piece, I would find this other kind of interesting sound. Or probably more importantly, I would come up with another melody line. Because when you put the whole piece together, to my sense at least, it's got these beginnings, middles, endings, kind of a tribute to a span of life. You have the birth, the young, the youth, the young adult, the older adult, and then kind of the riding off into the sunset. So, oftentimes it was, just a lyrical piano line, which if anyone kind of compares my last three albums, this is the most piano centric. There's a lot of piano work in this. So that definitely added to the length of the piece. Each time sitting down with it, saying, okay, it's done, another melody line or another instrument would another melody line on piano would come to me, or another instrument, out of Zebra would come out and become part of it. So it's probably a case of just having too many toys to play with at one point.
Also, for those
you don't know which one to put up.
Also, for those of you just tuning in, we're currently listening to an interview with ambient composer Tony Clark. Goes by the name of Renascence Music. We're talking about his latest album, 2440 Millennials. So, since you as a musician himself, did he have any input into the composition of this piece?
No, I mean, other than the input of, just him being Juha and just, my relationship with him, just that presence of him being him while I was creating it. It wasn't like a collaborative thing of like, there should be piano there, Tony, or hey, how about put this instrumentation there. It wasn't that much. It wasn't a process like that.
It was more just based on like that kind of mutual mentorship and that friendship.
Yeah, that and looking. My view of the millennial generation, he's in that slot of the millennial, and I'm in my 50s, so I'm in like Generation X. So I think that was also an inspiration for the piece, especially if you listen to Resilient and Quiet Blue together, just one track behind the other, Resilient Blue Quiet Blue being the last. You'll get this, going back to the sensibility of a lifespan or a walk along life. Quiet Blue turns very blue at the end, bluesy. There's some blues riff pianos in the end. So that looking at the millennial generation and their hopes and their dreams and and what their future will be was definitely part of the inspiration for those last two tracks.
And what do you think the future of the millennial generation is then?
Whew, boy, that's a big question. I mean, I hope it'll be extraordinarily good. Regardless of the bumps in the road that we may be experiencing here in the latter part of the 20th century and 21st century. My wish, for him and them is, a lot of love and light and, a really positive future, as they become the owners of the world.
It's interesting because as a millennial myself, you always hear people kind of freaking out about or like just kind of, complaining about this generation as a whole. I'm sure you've seen it all the kind of media.
But doesn't every older generation complain about the younger generation? I mean, we're the older generation moved at a certain speed and the younger generation moves at a certain speed, and sometimes it's like grinding the gears on a sports car. And it's a lot of people try to be predictive with the future, and that's so hard to do. It's from my perspective, it's more of a wishing you and him and them well, and being good stewards to society.
Now, I want to go back to the music a little bit because you mentioned that Quiet Blue features some bluesy piano notes, and I was thinking that when we think of ambient music and you think of blues, a lot of times they're considered almost opposites of the musical spectrum. So that's not something you hear very often, a bluesy ambient piece.
Yeah, I think it's because the piano was so prevalent in 2440 Millennial that towards the end, the end of the piece, which is in my mind representative of the end of life, this kind of bluesy piano lick came out of it, and I liked it, so it stayed in there, stayed as part of it, and it just it kind of made sense for the end of the song to have that slight sadness to it.
Especially since, as you said, it represents the end of life, which is a very sad occasion. So
yeah, it can be.
Now, next, I wanted to play. This is a song actually off one of your earlier albums. This is actually going to be off your first Music Uniquely Yours project. It's actually a bonus track on that album. It's called Neuro Lounge. All right, that song you just heard was Neuro Lounge by Renaissance off Music Uniquely Yours, Volume 1. Today I am joined by Renaissance Real. His real name is Tony Clark, ambient composer based in Austin, Texas. Also writes all of my bumper music. If you ever hear music in the background when I'm talking, going over kind of song or music liner notes, you can thank Tony for that.
Thanks, Matt. That's cool. You're still using that bumper music. That's cool. And Neuro Lounge, that's another bouncy rhythmic piece from a very quiet and retrospective type of album.
Yeah, it's cool how you have those kind of more energetic interludes within that kind of quiet, calm, contemplative music.
Yeah, it was basically just something to kind of, like you said, throw a little more energy. Track names like Allison's Quiet Place, Soraya's Dream, Donna's Sleep, Kelly's Rest. Those are pretty low-key titles and pieces of music. So, track 8, Neuro Lounge, get your heart back up and rate or something along those lines. Also, lots of really cool little loops in there. It was like, it's been a while since I've heard that piece. That's a fun one. That Neuro Lounge, it's interesting because I'm watching myself evolve musically, because you go back to what you're about to, I think, go back to that very first album. So many like produced loops going on, and now with 2440, it's all much more organic. Not produced loops. Actually, some of the 440 are actual synthesized sounds that I created myself instead of just firing up a preset.
Why do you think that change happened in your music?
I think just kind of evolving. One is just kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say being lazy, but relying on produced loops and things like that. Blending them together, which is what a lot of Neuro Lounge is a skill set, a craft. Taking multiple different loops and making them all work together. But I think a big part of it was just kind of an interest of that sounds really cool. I bet I could do that on my own and make my own sound or create my own my own this or that.
Just kind of discovering your
and
own.
And also, sometimes. Yeah, discovering your own sound. There's a couple of songs on Music Uniquely Yours that gets shut down on like YouTube for copyright because I'm using a female vocal loop, from a purchased loop library that other artists use, and so YouTube has a problem, identifying that as a piece of legal music. There's a couple of songs I've had to, write letters back to YouTube going, telling them it is original music. It's a purchased sample of a female vocalist.
It's interesting. So I guess the move to totally organic sounds on your last album is partially a business decision. Now you don't have to worry about YouTube sending you an email saying, "Hey,
yeah,
someone else used that."
That's true.
And
I'm not buying, loops. Now I'm just spending 100 times more on synthesizer engines.
It's not a money saver.
Sounds,
it's just
it's like, right now I'm deep into sound. Part of evolving as the artist is, I'm not happy with the sounds even, from a year ago that I was using. I want better, deeper, richer samples of strings, for example. I mean, I've spent a lot of time and money that we don't want to talk about on just getting yeah getting that string sound that I'm looking for, getting sounds that are organic, strings, pianos, horns, to where they actually really sound like they should.
Hmm.
It's all evolution.
Get the sounds that you hear in your head onto your kind of synth pad almost.
Yeah, or even listening back, to Neuro Lounge, or back to oh, I'm trying to see what's back on that very first album, but just hearing those string pads, going, man, I've got much better string pads today. I want to go back and redo that, with different, more organic, deeply sampled string pads. There's amazing sounds out there.
That's true. So I'm wondering, is your like basic musical philosophy the same as when you were making stuff like Neuro Lounge and that earlier albums, or do you try to view the creative process differently, or like have different goals with your music?
I think, like, for my own personal projects, I think my next one is going to be a different goal, in moving more towards the ambient sound, the genre of ambiance. And as I don't go into loop libraries and pull in beats and rhythms and grooves and looped sounds, then that's going to guide what my next projects will be like. Especially in the last couple of weeks, I've picked up some massive libraries of really, really gorgeous sounds. And they will be very prevalent, just like Zebra was prevalent in 2440. These, new synth engines that I've picked up in the last year will be prevalent in the next album.
So it's just like it's a change of technical approach almost that the music kind of reflects, like going from using vocal loops to using synth engines.
Yes, yeah. And, looking for a vocalist, which, if there's any female vocalists listening in and are interested in, creating or being a part of this type of music, I would love to work with a female vocalist who could kind of contribute to this overall sound. Because I love female vocals in this type of music. Kind of a throwback to way back to Cocteau Twins, if they ring a bell, from long ago. Her type of vocals were quite interesting and unusual.
Kind of integrating more or real vocals instead of sampled vocals.
Yes, yeah.
That's cool.
And because, again, with the sampled vocals, the unfortunate thing is, there's only so many libraries you can purchase from, and you're going to hear that same vocal loop in another song by another artist, and it's really kind of awkward when you're listening to a radio show and there's your song, and then 20 songs later there's another artist's song and it's the same female vocal loop. It was like, oh, rats. So it's that push to be more original.
Just make sure that your ambient music doesn't sound like someone else's ambient music. That kind of has a different, distinctive variation.
Yeah. And if you're using, creating your own sounds, working with your own vocalist, you can definitely push that envelope of individuality in the music.
Right. So, is there any timetable for your next release, or?
Well, the big secret to my release timetables is I release on a equinox, strangely enough. So it'll either be a spring, summer, or winter equinox. And kind of where I am right now in the creative and writing process, it's probably going to be a summer. Like, I'm not going to make the it's probably March 20th is the spring equinox. So I doubt seriously that I'm going to hit that metric. Yeah, it's going to be March 20th. So I'll probably be looking at the whatever summer date equinox is.
And for our listeners who'd like to stay in touch with you and be updated on these new releases, where can they go?
My website is probably a great place it is a great place to land. Now I had to make it really difficult. So Renascence is not spelled like the Renaissance time in history. It's spelled RENASCENCE. So renaissancemusic.com is where you will find a vast majority of the music. But I'm also out there on Spotify, iTunes,
Apple Music,
Google Play, Amazon. I'm in all the online retailers. But kind of keeping up with what's going on, my website's a great place for that, renaissancemusic.com.
Yeah, I think if you Google just Tony Clark ambient music, I think your Renaissance and everything should also come up. But anyway,
I'd never thought of that.
So, also, can you talk a little bit about your chill vibe tribe?
The Chill Vibe Tribe, yes, that is first it's my mailing list. So when people join up with the Chill Vibe Tribe, they're going to get emails saying, this is what I'm working on. These are my projects. Always looking for somebody who maybe you want to collaborate on it. But that's kind of the underlying intent of the Chill Vibe Tribe. Really, the tribe is about just taking a moment in our everyday, in our fast-paced, crazy days, and stop and smell the roses. Basically, reset, reflect, relax. That's what what the point of the group is more so. The music more or less supports it. And oftentimes, it might be other composers' music that I may throw out there, to support the overreaching concept of the Chill Vibe Tribe. But it's a mailing list. It's also a very small Facebook group, a little private face. We can talk a little more deeply. It's a two-way conversation on Facebook more so than a one-way on the email list.
That's a very cool way to just have that consistent interaction with people who listen to your music and just kind of just stay in touch.
Yeah, and it's it's definitely it's a mode of engagement. And I tell you, for anyone out there who like jumps around on Twitter, there's a pretty big group following along with my Twitter account, of all things. very surprised and pleased that Twitter is as active as it is. But yeah, at the end of the day, the point of the Chill Vibe Tribe is just to take a moment and slow down a little bit. And here's an offering of music to help that happen.
All right. And why do you think that kind of slowing down and resetting is so important?
Just probably at my point of life, I've been extraordinarily busy, since my 20s, with music and work and career and wife and family and it, again, this is the kind of generational perspective, but it just seems like things are going so much faster and faster, politically, socially, economically, now with the technology at our hands, there's so much information that can be blasted at us at any given moment. I remember when there were no cell phones. I remember seeing the first people wandering around on cell phones, and I remember vinyl and cassette tapes and things like that. Where it actually took you a while to rewind a tape to get to that first song again. It wasn't just click a button and there you go. So it just seems like we move so much faster with the technology, good or bad, and there still needs to be a moment for ourselves where we can just slow down and take 5-10 minutes and just breathe and just focus on our ourselves. And there seems to be kind of a common movement, at least across America. And I think it's a movement that's probably been happening in other parts of the world for quite some time, but America's kind of catching on to the yoga and meditation and mindfulness. I think, Time Magazine had a cover on it last month, 2 months ago, is like the new science of mindfulness, which is funny because, mindfulness is ancient. It's not really a new thing, but it seems to be getting more mainstream. And, I think it's important, especially as we kind of see what's going on in the news, recently, and just the enhanced agitations that are out there. May be a good idea to just relax for a little bit.
It's interesting because we have so much more information. You're right. It's a double-edged sword in a way, because you can have so much more knowledge than like you could have at any other point in human history. But at the same time, because of that, it's like how you use it and what you choose to kind of read or look at can shape so much.
Yeah. Read and look at exposure. We are exposed to so much information now, that it can be overwhelming. From good news to bad news. Everyone's got a cell phone with a camera on it and can capture what's going on at the moment. Where many years ago, you had to wait a day to get the news and a week to get the Sunday newspaper to see what was going on. And even then it was just, choice stories that would, fit the paper. Today, my cell phone is just lit up almost every hour with some news story. Yeah. Good news or bad news, but, there's always information coming at us.
And it's interesting how you say good news or bad news, because a lot of now with this extra information, it's getting harder for people to tell, what's real, like what's a real news story that's well researched and well put together, and then what's something that's just kind of propaganda disguised as news. Or, that's the
Yeah,
whole...
yeah, that's a big red button right now that a lot of people are banging on.
Yeah, from definitely every side of the aisle trying to take advantage of that trend and idea.
Yeah,
A lot of times,
it's it goes hand in hand with the ability to access the information, for good or bad. Was it a good thing 40, 50 years ago that all we had was a newspaper to read, or was it a bad thing?
I mean,
it's a good thing because the news was kind of metered out, but what news were we getting? Were we getting all sides of the story?
you'd be like one or two companies with control of that narrative. As like a journalist myself, it's interesting because it's like, you see, it's like good because there's so much of a diversity of sources where stories that would never get covered in the past are now getting covered. And that's something like, that's very important. Like something like a lot of the police shootings and like police brutality is stuff that maybe wouldn't have been covered maybe even like 20, 30 years ago without cell phone video or Twitter and social media and things like that. And that's hugely important to kind of hold those figures accountable. But at the same time, you have the rise where people, as you said, use like that kind of the fake news to almost discredit actual news and to lump the entire media industry under one category. But anyway, that's very off, a little off topic.
That's a show topic all on its own.
That's a show topic all on its own that I would love to definitely explore with you at some point, but we're almost out of time. So one last question I'd like to ask before we head off is, why did you decide, when you saw that mindfulness was important, why did you decide to devote your musical life to it?
I think that's where I was in my life timeline. In my youth, I was very much, pop rock writer, performer. And, after 30 years, it just, it felt natural to me just to slow down. And again, going back to technology, with the ability now to have a studio in your spare bedroom and the synthesizers that would have typically taken up an entire wall of a building at your fingertips, it becomes a wonderful opportunity to create, in that genre.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was great. It was great to talk to
Thank you,
as
Matt.
always. Next week we'll be with Warren Burnett, acoustic guitarist.
He is fabulous. I would encourage everyone to check out his work. He's one of the artists that I have thrown out to my Chill Vibe tribe numerous times. Love his work.
Again, if you'd like to listen to more of Tony's music, you can find him at renaissancemusic.com. That's spelled RENASCENCE music.com. Next week we'll have Warren, and I hope to hear you all again. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time to share the music and artists I love with you.
Thank you.